So the webinar we're going to go through today is customizing the end user experience. Now, I know that we have a lot of people with different roles within all your various organizations. So some of you are from finance, some of you are maybe project managers or maybe consultants potentially, some of you are administrators. So I know you're all coming at this from a slightly different perspective, and that's okay. This is still going to be useful to everyone. But I've set this up from the perspective of, let's assume that you're an administrator, and let's assume that you can make a lot of these changes and you're influencing how things are set up and how things are done. So that's really what we're talking about here. Some of this stuff you'll say, well, of course everybody knows that. Some of the stuff you'll say, oh, that's right, I forgot about that. It's been a long time. And some of the stuff hopefully will be new for you. So let's jump right in. Okay, so we're going to cover a lot of different things, but I think of them in four main areas. What is possible? What are all the things that you can do that affects the UI? And then once we cover all of those things, we're going to try to narrow that down and say, well, just because you can do everything doesn't mean it's all a good idea all the time. So we're going to talk about some recommendations. Making it easier for new users. The new user setup is a very critical piece of making sure that people have the best UI experience possible. And then also for all of your current users, what can you do to kind of clean things up for those folks too. So that's the agenda. Let's talk about what is possible. First of all, terminology. You can actually change module names. I think most people know that you can change the names of fields, which we'll look at in a second. But you can actually change the module name. So the screenshot here is if you don't call projects projects, if you call them jobs in your environment, it does require an internal switch, but you can send a note to OpenAir support and they can change that whole module name for you. I don't see this used a lot, but if you really find that you're fighting against OpenAir terminology and it's causing confusion, it might be something to keep in mind. Then again, if you've been using the system for a long time, it's probably too late. You don't want to confuse everybody by renaming something once people are already kind of used to the terminology. Field values and record names. I think most of you are probably familiar with this. The most probably common example is envelope, what OpenAir calls an envelope. 90% of us call an expense report. Expense report is actually considered a custom term. There's not a term that they offer in their little pick list, but you can rename all sorts of things. People will rename bookings to allocations. I've seen people rename users to employees. Lots of options there, and that's where you find it under administration. Terminology overrides. So really, the candidates here are when you find people are confused by OpenAir terms because everyone else in the company calls something something else. That's where you want to consider terminology changes. Another slightly less known feature is the ability to rename built-in summary fields. So what is a built-in summary field? When you create a summary report, it's the fields at the top that you report on. Okay, they're summary values. So the example here, I actually dealt with this with a customer yesterday. The whole value of booked hours with actuals is kind of a confusing thing because what does that actually mean? How is it calculated? So if you wanted, you could change the title. So in this example, it's a little longer, but at least it's more clear. What that actually is doing is showing booked hours from today and actuals from before. If you have a more clear title, that's great. But the idea here is it doesn't change really. These aren't fields that you would select on a record. It's just that when you're reporting and you see the report, the column title, this is what appears in that column title. So you can rename these. You can also rename built-in detail fields. So the example I'm showing here is when you run a report, either a detail report or a detail field in a summary report, there's a value for users called associated with company work schedule. That's kind of a long way of saying work schedule. So you can rename it. You just create a new rename built-in detail field. Once you get in here and start looking around at what's possible, it's pretty easy, but it's commonly overlooked, and I really like it to clean up reports. So take a look at that. Okay, getting into form permissions. So most of us are familiar at least with some basic form permissions options. If you're not, that's okay. At the most common usage is to show, hide, require, or to make fields read-only. And this is a per role thing. Okay, now years ago, this was kind of what they started with form permissions was per user, let's expose, require fields or make them read-only for given users, and they've added things over the years. So in the little screenshot here, you can see the project location is hidden for these roles. But I could say, you know what, let's show it for project administration. Let's make it read-only for user, and let's maybe show it for administrator. So you can do all sorts of things per role. So based on who they are when they log in, they see a different form. Some more options that can be potentially useful. Let's say you want to give access to non-project managers to be able to open projects, open and view tasks and everything, but you don't want them to actually make any changes. So here, this is one way that you can do that. You can just disable the Save button, as you can see in the top screenshot there. And maybe you say, well, project administrators in this case can modify projects but not delete projects. Maybe only administrators can delete records. You can just disable that delete button. You can also hide divider sections by role. So divider sections is kind of an OpenAir term, but here's what it means. If I just jump into a project here, here's a demo project. When you're looking at any form and you scroll down, these black sections that are collapsible, that's what we're talking about. So this one only has a few shown because actually we've hidden several of these divider sections. And you can do that per role. So if administrators need more sections than just your basic user, hide them for the user, enable them for other roles. Okay, form notes. Here's a couple examples. If you're not using notes on forms, you don't necessarily want to go crazy, but here's just a couple ideas of what's possible. The top right picture is actually from one of the companies that I work with. So they have a policy, and we actually talked about this on a previous webinar, that all custom calculations, their policy is to add an asterisk at the end of the title so that they can tell in a report, this is a custom calculation. So there's a note when you create a new custom calculation or modify one, just to remind you to always add the asterisk to the end of the title. On the bottom left is kind of a crazy example. I wouldn't say crazy, but a more detailed example of what's possible. There's some basic HTML here. So in this case, when you're looking at a user record, there's a little reminder table at the top of saying, hey, for what we call a consultant in our company, here's the role and the filter set that we want to give them. Now you could add more with any kind of field or any kind of guidance here. Just put it right on the form, and that'll help you as kind of a cheat sheet rather than having to refer to a separate document. You also see there's a link here for cost center or code lookup. If you have a bunch of cost centers, I know a lot of people have 80 plus cost centers, and they're all particular numbers, and it's hard to remember what's what. Maybe you have a link somewhere else on some of the website, and you can just click there to go refer to it, make sure they're in the right cost center, things like that. So consider adding notes to sort of self-document the application, make things a little bit easier. Default values, this is my favorite slide. There's so much here. Actually, I'm going to toggle over to the application again and show you how these work. So if you're not familiar with default values, essentially the idea is when you create a new record, some of these fields should be pre-populated. Now, we're looking at an actual project, and a lot of people make this mistake. You scroll to the bottom of the project and you see, wait, I don't have an option to modify the default values. I only have modify the form permissions. Well, that's because you can't set them unless you're creating a new record. So I have to go new, up here, new project, And now on this form, if I scroll to the bottom, now I have set form default values. So I'm going to click on that. Okay? And this tells me for all roles or maybe for a particular role. So in this case, I'm going to say just for the role of project administration, I'm going to set some default values. So I'm going to say the default stage should be this qualification stage. And I'm going to say the default offering might be training, who knows. Whatever it is that you want to set here, whatever I save is going to be applicable to this particular role. So when a project administration user logs in and creates a new project, these fields are going to be pre-populated. Or I can just do it globally. So any new project, regardless of your role, you're going to get certain things preset, things like that. Now, one of the most common questions that I get is, can you do this for the new user form? Sadly, the answer is no. No default values for new users, but lots of other forms do have them. Okay, permission rules. So we talked about form permissions, which is really kind of controlling field access by role. This is different. This is field access based on other field values. Okay, so this example shows if the project stage is complete, then require an actual end date field. This is actually a pretty common scenario. You want to track the actual date that the project ended, but of course you don't want to populate it until the project actually did end. So this rule says if you change the project stage to complete, then this field, actual end date, is going to be required. So if it's been empty, now suddenly you can't save it in the complete stage until this field is populated. Then you can save it. So this is a great starter if you haven't played with these. This is a good one to start with. Keep in mind, though, when you're dealing with project stages, these permission rules only apply when you're modifying the form and saving the form. So it doesn't help you when you are in the project list view and you change the project stage. So if I go to Projects, All, and I check this box, and I'm going to change the stage of the project to complete, my form rule doesn't come into play here. I changed the stage, but the form rule that's on here that says you have to add the actual end date doesn't apply. It's only if I go in here, modify the project, go into Edit Project, change it here, and then save, does that rule actually kick in. Okay? What is possible? Moving on to roles and filter sets. Again, we're not really talking about security in this webinar. We're really trying to focus on the end user experience. But the role that users get and their filter set has a major impact on their experience and what they see in the system. So for example, some of the more common limitations for roles: limiting access to cost, modifying and downloading lists. So this is actually pretty important. You might think, well, I don't want users to modify lists. You see that in a role permission. What that means is when they're looking at projects, for example, this whole option to customize the list view, it only affects them. It doesn't affect anybody else. But if they want to move columns around, remove columns, add columns, they wouldn't be able to do that. So that's an important role permission. And saving and sharing reports is another role permission. You can disable this or enable this per role. So if you don't want particular roles to be able to save reports or view shared reports, that's an option. It certainly affects their whole experience in the system. Filter sets. I include that here mostly because think about the concept of if you log in and you only see 5 projects versus the person who sits next to you logs in and sees 500 projects. That's a pretty different experience. If you're getting these really constrained, sometimes it can create problems with why can't I see the project I need to see, or why can't I see the user I need to see, or the client isn't available when I'm trying to create a new project. Things like that can really affect the whole experience in filter sets. And the thing I didn't actually put in here that I should have is the ability to use a hierarchy on users and projects. So let's say you have a geographical hierarchy. You can apply it to projects. So maybe within the U.S. region, there are several projects, and you want U.S. users to only be able to view U.S. projects. You can do that based on their filter set to just be able to give them access to, say, projects in my hierarchy. All right, we're still talking about what's possible. Departments is commonly overlooked, but of course you can customize the message for each department to make it more relevant to them. So if you have somebody who's really engaged in the system, you've got people logging in at least once a week to do time and expenses. Many people are a lot more than that. It's really easy to just log in, go quickly to what you're looking for, and overlook that dashboard message. So two things that you can do to make this more relevant. One is having a different message per team, making sure that kind of one person per department is responsible for maintaining it, providing relevant updates. And the other thing, this is actually a snapshot from our internal dashboard that shows this funny little comic about consulting projects. There's actually more to it. I'm just trying to show you the concept here. If you change the graphic, people are going to notice, oh, there's something different here. They'll stop and they'll take a look, and then they'll see your updates. But if you just have text and you're changing the text updates, chances are people are going to not notice that that's changed. So just a little trick that I've learned, keep those rotating, and it grabs people's attention and they know, oh, I should probably look at this dashboard. All right, personal settings. Personal settings for me are, I would say, probably one of the most overlooked options in the system, because if you're like me and you've used the system for a lot of years, you get kind of comfortable with how you have your own system set up. You have it just the way you like, and when you were new, you were probably playing with a lot of different things, but then you get used to it and you forget that these options ever even existed. So a couple quick reminders just in case you've forgotten about these options. The number of items and drop-downs can actually be really important. So if you're, let's say you're assigning people to tasks a lot, and you're never seeing the right person in your drop-down of available users in tasks, and you always have to search for the right person. You can increase the number of users who show up there, and the ones that you use the most frequently are going to stay in that list, but you can actually increase it to all if you want, so you never have to search for anything in a pick list. So that can be big. Two types of advanced filters. Let me toggle over and show you what I mean. What we're looking at here is what OpenAir calls the inline advanced filter. And it's called inline because you can modify the settings inline. So if I want to filter by finish date and client, all these settings are inline here. However, if I go to my personal settings and I disable that, then I get a different advanced filter. So I'm going to uncheck this under page layout. And now my advanced filter looks different. Now I still have the advanced filter here, but if I want to modify it, the options aren't in line here. I have to go to Edit Filters, and then you need to pop up, and now I can modify it. Okay? Personal preference. Some people like it in line because they don't have the pop-ups. Personally, I actually like this because it takes up less real estate on the page. Of course, you can collapse the options in the advanced. It's really just, again, personal preference. But it's one of those things we forget. We don't look at it. We get used to the way that we have it, and oh, yeah, there's another option. The next one, show currently active module in browser title bar. This is one of my favorites. If you don't have it, strongly recommend you enable this. Let me show you where it is. And under personal settings, it's checked right here, show currently active module name in the browser title bar. Why is this important? Because if I have a lot of different tabs open, across the top here in my browser, I can see this tab is on the dashboard, this tab is on reports, this tab is on purchases. So if I need to go, if I'm jumping back and forth a lot in all these different tabs, I know just by looking at the tab name, this is the projects module, this is the purchases module. Okay? Big time saver when you're jumping around a lot. So if you don't have that turned on, I recommend you turn it on. It's free. It doesn't cost anything. Pop-up window size options. This is one of those things that, again, if you never played with it in the first place, it's pretty cool to take a look at. Let me show you what the options are. If you scroll down in Personal Settings, there's a couple options here that affect pop-up windows. One is remember the size of pop-up windows, and two is disable automatic resizing of pop-up windows. Let's take them one at a time. Right now, this is unchecked to remember the size of pop-up windows. Okay, so if I jump over to a project here, and let's actually pull up some pop-up windows. All right, here's my demo project. I go to Edit, and down at the bottom, let's say, where did it go? I've got an expense policy here. So here's a pop-up window. It shows up this size. Now if I resize it because it's not quite big enough and I do that, then I close it, the next time I open it, it goes right back to the original size. Okay, now if I go back to my personal setting and I say remember the size of pop-up windows and save that, oops. Now I'm going to go, I think I might need to refresh this just to make sure that change took place. Go back to Edit Project, and now let's see what happens. Okay, now this pop-up window is kind of a weird size. Let's get it to where we want it. There it is. Now we close it. We don't even have to save it. We just close it, and boom, it remembered the size that I had it last. Now this might seem like, oh, great, this is really convenient. I'll turn that on. But what happens when you open up a different pop-up window, right? Now I have a different pop-up window. This is actually too big for this message. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't remember it per pop-up. It remembers that if there's a pop-up, it's the last size that you saved it at. So you're still going to end up probably resizing things a bit. What's the other option? Let's turn off remember the size. And then let's say disable automatic resizing of pop-up windows. Here's what this does. Refresh our project here. Okay, so here's the pop-up window. I'm going to make it big. It didn't, you know what, actually, I think I confused myself. I was playing with this yesterday, and I don't remember. That's embarrassing. So sorry about that. But play with these options and see what they actually do. And the main one that I've really played with is remember the size of pop-up windows, whether you want to resize things or have it automatically resize things for you. So I'm going to say remember the size of pop-up windows. That's usually what I have. So sorry about that. I can follow up. And then the last one on this slide is mouse over, menu, or click. So here's what I mean by this. Right now, my mouse is over this dashboard menu. Nothing's happening. It's kind of changing colors a little bit, but it's not really doing anything. I have to click on it to see the pop-up or to see the rest of the menu. Okay? So that's one option. However, if I check this option down at the bottom, hovering over menu links reveals menu options, and save that. Now all I'm doing, I'm not clicking, I just moused over, and that's automatically appearing. I don't really care which way it is, to be honest. I don't think one way is better than the other, but it's a personal preference. So there you go, another thing you might not have realized. All right. Everything I just showed you is available for each individual user to change for their own experience. It's also something that you can preset for them in their user records. So if you're opinionated about some of these things and you think that, you know what, one of these ways of using the system I think is better to start with, that's great. Use that and preset them in their user records, and you can save people a little time or help them out. Okay, some other UI options of what's possible. This is actually a new feature. It has to be enabled, the in-page custom field audit report pop-up. Love that title. This is what it does. If you're looking at the screen here, it shows you if you click on, you're in a form, you click on a custom field, you can see historically all the changes that have been made to that field, by whom, on what date, and the from and the to values. So let me show you what that looks like real quick. Here I am in the project form again. This does not work on standard fields. Like project stage, I can click on that. That's not available yet. I've got my fingers crossed that they'll turn that on for us at some point. But today it's just for custom fields. So I've got this custom field, projected project end date. Notice my mouse is like a little pointer here, but when I move over here, it turns into a finger. That's how you can tell it's a link. I click on that, and it shows this pop-up right on the screen. So I can see, oh, cool. There's all the changes that have been made to that field. I don't have to run an audit trail report. It's just right there. So that's a pretty cool field to have. Again, it is an internal switch, so you'll have to send a request to OpenAir support, and they'll turn that on for you. Plus and minus font size. This is one of those things you might have noticed it when you were new at the system, but just in case it's been a while and you forgot about it, down here at the bottom of every form, there's a plus and minus little toggle. You can't control it anywhere else. You can't preset it for users, but it just magnifies the screen a little bit without having to artificially magnify your browser. So I can make it really tiny, and then now I can fit lots of stuff on my page. So another thing to play with. Okay, just because all of those things are possible doesn't mean they're all a good idea all of the time. So let's talk about a little bit more specifics and recommendations. Usually less is more. What do I mean by that? What I mean is think of a new user who's just logging into your system for the first time, the less they see that's cluttering, that's confusing, that's getting in the way, the better. We want their experience to be focused on what do I need to do, what do I need to know, and get rid of everything else. So that's what I mean when I say less is usually more. So unused fields on forms. If you find that your project managers, to create a project, click Create, check one box, and then scroll down to the very bottom past all the stuff that they don't care about, maybe it's time to revisit that form and say, wait a minute, why are you skipping all these fields? Either we need to make some fields required that you're not populating, or we need to just hide them if they're not relevant to you. Disable access to modules not used. If you're not using workspaces, for example, you can just turn off that whole workspaces module. If you have people whose only job is to enter time and expenses and nothing else, you can disable access to the resources module, the projects module, things like that, so that they don't even know or care that they exist. They just log in, do what they need to do, and get out. Unused menu items too. So issues to me is the big candidate where a lot of people don't use issues. If that's you, just get rid of it altogether. Just hide it. Why have it there cluttering up the project if you know you're never going to use it? Minimize the number of roles and filter sets. I'm going to talk about that actually in just a minute. And the tip of the day for you is hide the Help tab. Now, why would I say hide the Help tab? I'm trying to get you to get more value out of the system. Oh, this font is way too small. And here I am telling you to hide the Help tab. I'll tell you why. There's good news and bad news. I'll start with the bad news first. The bad news is if you go to the Help tab and you say, let's just click on About the Projects module, you see that the last updated date was 2002. That's the bad news. The good news is the documentation in the Support tab is great. It's improved a lot with OpenAir's introduction of Suite Answers. They've been using this for NetSuite for a while, and they extended it to OpenAir. And it's not just moving things around. It's actually a lot of new content that hasn't been available. So if you need help, you need support, and you want to look through the documentation in the system, use the Support tab, not the Help tab. So you can actually send a note to OpenAir support and say, please just can you disable the Help tab, and let's not confuse people. Okay, sometimes more is actually more though. And what do I mean by this? Here's what I mean. Your filter sets, when it comes to limiting what data people can see, I would start with a bias of more is more. Start with assume that everybody should be able to see all data. I don't mean cost necessarily, obviously not personal information, but assume that everybody should be able to see all projects. Then think about, why do we need to restrict the number of projects they can see? What is our reason? Is it a good reason? Because again, people have the ability to filter on the projects that they own, projects in their regions, projects that they care about by stage. There's lots of other tools that people can have. But the problem that can be caused is you end up with all these workarounds. So this slide is a little bit confusing. Sorry about that. But here's what happens is you have these really strict filter sets, and you end up with, let's say, 12 filter sets. Okay? And that means that it's really complex. So when you're trying to figure out what's the right filter set for somebody, you find a workaround. You either give them one that you think is right, or you create another one just for them because they're special. Then you end up with too many roles, too many filter sets, and the new users come on board, and they end up getting the wrong one, and you start getting lots of complaints of saying, why can't I see this? Hey, I see this. Should I be able to? If you find yourself getting lots of those kinds of complaints or requests, you might want to rethink your whole approach. This is kind of the vicious cycle in a slightly more visual format. Okay, so you're a busy administrator. You're setting up user access. You're trying to fix user access. And you've got all these roles and all these filter sets, and they're all kind of exceptions or slight modifications of one another. So that's the first step. You're too busy to find the right setup, and it's too complicated. So your quick fix, let's just create a new role or a new filter set. Then other users get added, maybe by somebody else, and they get the wrong thing. Then you start getting a lot of complaints. Hey, I can't see the data I need. Can you fix this? And you start doing one-offs. Start with more is more in terms of sets of data. If somebody can see projects, be sure that there's a really good reason you're restricting their view of those projects, because you're just creating more difficulties down the road if you're too restrictive. This is not a science exactly. It's more of an art, and I know that a lot of you have pretty strong opinions about this anyways. This is just a bias that I have for less complexity, which means broader access. That's what I mean by more is more. Okay, ease of use versus data requirements. So the business says we need more data, and the users say we need a simpler system. This is a true story, actually. Many, many years ago, I actually quit a job because the system that they implemented was so confusing and did nothing to make me better at my job, and made my job really, really hard and frustrating. It was just an awful, awful system, and I actually quit my job over that. Terrible. Because it just made it unbearable. So you have to balance this. The business is always going to want more data, more details, better reports. The users are always going to want to have a really simple system with as few steps as possible to get their work done. So how do you balance this? You have to play referee. So rather than taking sides, if you start getting complaints from one side or the other, I put on the referee hat, and when I'm talking to the business, I say, how are you actually going to use these fields that you're saying you need, these extra clicks, these extra steps, and specifically, what decisions is this driving? Now, it is true, the business usually wins because the business is the one who bought the system, who hired the people, and all of that. But you should be prepared to challenge some assumptions. Just because somebody wants a report does not necessarily mean that it's worth all the extra cost, time lost, inefficiency to get them that report, right? So help them understand that I understand you want this report and this new data, but here's the impact it will have. Is it really worth that added cost and inefficiency? So challenge them a little bit. And same thing on the user side. Okay, I know you don't like clicking these 2 extra fields, but honestly, how much time is that taking? How many times a week are you clicking on these fields? Let's add it up. How much are you losing by doing this? And then the other part of this is it's not always just clicks. Sometimes you're requiring fields that people don't know the right answer to. I don't know what division this is. I don't know what solution this is. It's too early to tell, but you're requiring me to pick it. So I just picked the wrong thing, and that leads to bad data. So talk to them. Here's just a couple scenarios. These are common complaints that I've heard. It takes too long to create or update my project plan, right? I'm sure most of us have heard this. OpenAir, setting up tasks and phases is just really tedious. It's too slow. I don't like it. Okay, so here are some possibilities. That none of these answers are necessarily right or perfect. Some possibilities. Make sure that the users are using project templates if at all possible, or cloning projects if possible. You can copy tasks from another project. So if they have another project that's similar, go to that other project and open up the phases within that, copy the phase and the tasks within it, and move them to the new project. That can potentially save time. Using predecessors can save time when you're moving dates around a lot. So just because people don't like the system or say that it's slow doesn't necessarily mean that they know how to use it or they're aware of all of the features and it's a system problem. Sometimes it's a training problem. Another complaint I get, I don't know what these fields are for, so I just skip them. That might be okay. In a lot of cases, that's fine. Just skip the fields. But think about, what is that actually doing in terms of cluttering up the system and making them kind of blur their eyes and say, the system's too complicated, there's too much stuff. Maybe we need to hide some of those fields for those people who don't use them. Maybe we need to conditionally require them if they're skipping important fields based on form rules. And maybe it's just a training issue. Too many drop-downs in my timesheet. This one you usually have less flexibility, but if it's a common complaint, you might want to consider, do we really need these fields? How are we using them? What reports are they driving? Usually when you implement the system, these decisions are made based on good reasons. But if you have a lot of extra drop-downs besides project and task, and you're getting a lot of complaints, maybe just validate, is this really the right approach? And some of the time you might be able to save by enabling default values. They work differently on timesheets. But if you need people to populate a time type, for example, maybe it's a good idea to enable, when they create a new timesheet, to enable a default time type. So when they create it, select the default time type. The new timesheet has that populated so they have fewer clicks. Or maybe you want to clone type sheets. That might save time. And if you're getting a lot of reports that are missing data, then you want to look at a couple things. One is, can we address this with form permissions so that we require fields? And two, can we create audit reports to catch problems sooner? Sometimes you can't really require fields. There's just lots of reasons why that is the wrong approach. But if that's the case, then maybe schedule a weekly report that just says, hey, here's a list of all the users, and look for these missing fields or projects with missing fields or missing billing rules, things like that. All right. Making it easier for new users. We want to start new users on the right foot. So here's some things you can do to ease their transition. Pay attention to the personal settings. We just looked at a lot of those. So think about, when you're creating a new user, I know it's really tempting. We just breeze through all of those personal settings, not really caring. It's the same for everybody. Let's just move on. I'm in a hurry. But think about, if you think one of those personal settings is really a time saver, really useful, think about how you're starting people off when you're creating a new user. Add save reports to the Home tab. So this one I really like. Let me show you what this looks like. So I'm in my system here. I'm going to just create a new user. I'm going to call that new user. Here they are. I just created them, let's say. It's like a cooking show. I just skipped that step. So there they are. Now, once I created them, I'm going to proxy in as them. So I'm going to go log in as new user. Here they are. Now I'm proxying in for new user. They haven't even logged into the system yet. I'm going to go to their home page. I'm going to add reports on their home tab. Now these are saved reports that have already been shared with all users. My billable utilization, my bookings next 6 weeks. And I'm going to save. Now what are the odds that they're going to know that they can do that when they first log in the system? I would say 0. You might have some really curious new hires who aren't very busy yet and figure this out on their own. But this is a great thing to do, to just go ahead and add them. Then when you're training them on the system and walking them through it, you can say, hey, I've saved a couple reports. If you want to add more of your own, click on Customize, and any of your own reports that you create will show up there. So it's just an extra step that you can do for them. You can use the bulk user change wizard to assign them list views, booking chart settings, and even dashboard charts. So if you have some dashboard charts that you've set up that you think are useful to new employees, you can assign them with the bulk user change wizard. Also list views. If, for example, if you hired a project manager and you want their project list view to include certain fields that you think is just a big time saver and get rid of fields that you think are cluttering. Oh, I'm proxied in, I can't modify it, but when I'm the admin and I'm in the projects module and I'm, let's say, in all here, I go to Customize List View, and I move things around. I get them to where I think all new users should start with. And then how do I do that, though? This is the question. How do I know what list view it is that I actually want to assign them? So when you go to the bulk user change wizard here on the home page, you'll see that there are some options. So I'm going to copy from myself because I've got it set up the way I like. And if I scroll down here, I see all of these settings, list customizations. And you see the names aren't necessarily self-explanatory, right? Customer PO, I might know what that is. But when it comes to like project list views, there's a lot of them here. PM flat, PM list, I don't know what these are. How do I tell? Here's how you tell. You go to your personal settings. Oops. And under personal settings, there is an option. Let me find it here. Is it up here? There it is. Show the list name in page footer. What does this actually do? When I save this, here's what's different. I go to my project. In this list view, here it is, PM list all. So this particular list view of all these column headers and the order and so forth, I can now copy the PM list all here to my new user. Now when they log in and they go to that particular list view, theirs will be set up just like mine. There's a lot of list views that you can modify. So if you want to just have a template of saying, you know what, all my list views, let's start everybody with what I can see. Or with maybe there's another user. Just select them all, copy them all, and now you know what they're seeing is what they should be seeing to start off with. Keep in mind that this does not copy over their advanced filters. Wish you could, you can't, not included. And use the same process for booking chart settings and dashboard charts. And this last bullet point is very, very important. Whenever I do new employee training, new user training, the very first thing that I do is I walk them through the UI. I spend at least 15 minutes on, let's log in together. Okay, here's what you see. Get them oriented with the general navigation. Show them a lot of these personal settings. Show them the text plus and minus. Show them all of that stuff and just have them click around and view things for a while. Before I do any kind of, here's how you create a project, stuff like that. They need to be comfortable with the UI before they do anything else. All right, for current users, be proactive about communication. If you're changing things in the system, make sure that you give them a heads up. Hey, in 2 weeks we're going to change this. Hey, in 1 week we're going to change this. Reminder, tomorrow we're changing this. This will look different. Also, draw their attention to the dashboard, which we looked at before. Change the pictures to get their attention. Make documentation easy to find. If you're not storing your user guides, if you have them in the system, I highly recommend you do that. Whether you put them on a workspace or link to them on the dashboard, make them easy to find. Any major changes, you want to be sure you give them plenty of notice. And ask people for feedback, especially the complainers. The complainers are good because they're the ones who are actually using the system. They're the ones who are trying to find the limits. And they're the ones who have an opinion about how the system should work. Other people might not be complaining, but it's not because they don't like it. It might just be because they're not as opinionated or they don't have strong opinions about how things should work. So take advantage of the people who are giving you negative feedback and say, hey, what would you change if we could? Can we sit down and talk about this? Some of it I might not be able to fix, but some of it I can. You might have some good ideas. And the most useful thing you can do is watch users use the system. Time and time again, when I shadow somebody and I look over their shoulder and see how they're getting around and how they're making updates, that's when I realize, wow, there's a lot of things that you're not aware of that would actually save you a lot of time. So nothing like actually watching them use the system in their normal job. Here's a challenge I'm going to give all of you. Find a volunteer and buy them lunch. I'm going to say buy them lunch because that's going to make them want to volunteer. But here's the idea. Maybe have a working lunch session. And from different departments, get somebody in finance, somebody in administration, somebody in all the different groups, consultants, and go through the screens that they use, whether they're entering time, entering expenses, creating projects, updating project plans, running billing, sending invoices, whatever it is. Let's walk through the screens that you use most frequently. And for each field, I'm going to ask you, do you know what that field is, why it's there, and what it's used for? And you would be amazed at how many people say, I have no idea, I just skip that field. Ask them, if you could get rid of any of these fields, which ones would you get rid of? And then also ask them, what's the most frustrating part of using the system? Now again, you can't necessarily fix everything, and the system is the system, but for user issues, some of the things you can fix with UI, some of the things you can fix with training, some of the things maybe you want to submit an enhancement request to OpenAir because one change might make all the difference to your users. So you don't really know what improvements need to be made until you actually go through this exercise. You will be amazed at how much you can learn.
No, thank
okay.
You.
Well, I think that's a wrap. Thanks everybody for joining. And I'll post that link for our image on the dashboard. I'll post it to the OpenAir user group on LinkedIn. So if you're not already on the LinkedIn OpenAir users group, I recommend you join. There's some good stuff out there, so keep an eye out for that.